Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Tuesday. It is 4 p.m. ET, and we are so pleased that you have found us here on Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze. I'm your host, Hank Phillippi Ryan, the USA Today bestselling author of 16 novels of suspense. My newest book is called All This Could Be Yours, so casually displayed on the door behind me. It is now an instant USA Today bestseller and already in a second printing, so I'm really, really happy about that. And I want to thank you all for that. I know you made that possible, and I'm really grateful. But today we are not talking about All This Could Be Yours, unless you really want to. Today we are here to talk to the fabulous Jesse Kellerman, half of Jesse and Jonathan Kellerman, and their new book, COYOTE Hills, which is just out today. You all, this is a terrific book. This is, if you haven't read any of the Clay Edison series before, that's okay. You can, I'm just trying to get the comments here. That's why I'm not looking at the camera. There you are. Hey, Shannon Hansen. Hey, Melanie. If you haven't read any of the Clay Edison books before, that's fine. You can start with this one. It is a gorgeous, wonderful, it's part of a series, but this is supremely a standalone. It is fun. It is fast paced. The dialogue is genius. The setting is terrific. The story is surprising. I did not figure out what was going on, much to my absolute delight. So I am really happy to see Jesse Kellerman here today so I can talk to him about this book. Congratulations and happy Pub Day to you both.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Are you two together, you and your father, who you write this book with your dad? Are you together on Pub Day, or how do you celebrate?
Well, he happens to be out of the country today, so we talked this morning. He's abroad in Israel right now, and there's a 10-hour time difference between there and California. So I did call him this morning to say congratulations. We gave ourselves a nice pat on the back, and then I went back to work and started writing again because that's what you do when you're a writer. You sit down and you write.
But I mean, it must be, and I want to talk to you about this in a bit, but you and your father sharing a pub day, that's kind of extraordinary, that connection. Is it still cool for you? Is it still amazing for you?
Oh, 100%. I do not take this collaboration for granted for 1 second. I don't take for granted the fact that we can manage to do it within the confines of contemporary publishing, which, as you are well aware, gets tougher and tighter all the time. So it's a privilege to be able to do this for a living. And nor do I take for granted that he and I are able to work together so well, which is also not a given when you're dealing with a father and a son. My dad and I, the thing I typically say is we both understand that our relationship both preceded and will continue on after the collaboration has ended. So the relationship is more important than the collaboration, and so we bring, I think, that level of love and mutual respect to the table. That said, we both are highly opinionated writers with our own sense of style, and I think we both come to the table looking to to write the best book we can possible, and thankfully that has never resulted in anything I describe as conflict. We definitely have some very intense conversations, but they're more of the conversations that you have when you're just mind melding extremely well with somebody. My dad tends to liken it to a family band where the voices have a certain sort of kinship and harmonize well, and that's really what it is for us. We're very much our own people, but we work very hard to create this distinct third voice.
I love that. And I want to talk to you more about that writing and that relationship, but it's really quite inspirational to know that it comes sort of from love and mutual respect and having a mutual goal, and both being wise and smart and, full of humor enough to be able to, and full of love enough to make that continue. We were talking about COYOTE Hills by Jesse Kellerman and Jonathan Kellerman. Jesse is with us today, as are so many of you. Hey, Vicki Gregory, and Laura Huerta is here. So nice to see you, Lori Hernandez and Shannon Hansen. Kathy Lanigan, Melanie Borelli is here. So nice to see you all. Thank you. Vicki Gregory, you're coming and coming and coming. Thank you. If you are new to A Mighty Blaze, welcome, welcome, welcome. You have picked a marvelous day to arrive. Mighty Blaze was started 5 years ago, more than that now, at the beginning of the pandemic, by the fabulous powerhouse duo of Jenna Blum and Caroline Levitt, to keep us reading new books and discovering new authors and discovering new favorite novels. And this just might be one of them, Coyote Hills by Jesse and Jonathan Kellerman. Oh, let me not forget to tell you that we are giving away a copy of Coyote Hills. Well, we're not. Jesse is giving away. Because I'm keeping this one. I'm not giving this baby away. But Jesse is giving away a copy of Coyote Hills to one lucky commenter. Leave a question or a comment or just general applause in the chat, and we will pick a winner at the end. The Wheel of Fun is cranky today. It has decided it's not going to work. So Margaret in the back room will pick a winner at the end of the show. She will close her eyes and spin the wheel or whatever she does back there to make it fair. But nevertheless, leave a question or a comment or just general applause in the chat for Jesse Kellerman, and you will be entered to win a copy of Coyote Hills, and you will be so happy you win. It is really, really good. Let me tell you quickly, Jesse Kellerman won the Princess Grace Award for Best Young American Playwright and is the author of Sunstroke, Trouble, which was nominated for the ITW Thriller Award for Best Novel, The Genius, winner of the Grand Prix de l'Actrice d'Elle, The Executor, and Potboiler, which was nominated for the Edgar Award for Best Novel. That is a big deal, you all. He lives in California and writes the Clay Edison series with his father, Jonathan Kellerman. And as we said, Coyote Hills is the latest. Renee Herskowitz is here, and Susan is here, and Melanie Brilliant here, and Drew Ball is here. So many good people are here to talk about this marvelous book. So, Jesse, welcome. And now
Thank you.
Stop talking and let you talk. Tell us a little bit about Coyote Hills.
So Coyote Hills is the sixth book in the Clay Edison series. Clay Edison is our protagonist, who, if you've read some of the books, although it's not necessary to have read the preceding books, you can jump in at any point, but if you have read them, you might be familiar with him as a character. The beginning of the series, he starts out as an Alameda County, that's East Bay, where I live in Berkeley, California, Alameda County Sheriff Coroner. And his job as a sheriff coroner, for those of you who might not be familiar, has sort of two sides to it. There's an investigative side, which is to determine the cause and manner of death when a death is suspicious in the county. And there's also almost a therapeutic role that sheriff coroners play, in that they're often the ones interacting with bereaved families. And we chose that particular profession because it presented this fascinating dynamic, this fascinating combination of sort of the hard-hitted investigative side, detective side, plus the human, psychological, emotionally sensitive side that we wanted to bring out in his character. Over the course of the series, Clay tends to get himself in trouble and stray further and further far from his remit. And by the time we catch up to him in Coyote Hills, he's actually pivoted out to become an independent private investigator. And the reason we decided to make that change, there were a few reasons we decided to make that change. The first is we wanted to try something new. Neither of us have actually written a traditional detective novel per se. My dad's protagonist for 40 plus books, Alex Delaware, is a psychologist. And in my standalone novels, I always wrote from the perspective of a non-law enforcement officer and an outsider. So for example, The Genius, the protagonist is an art dealer. Both of us always involve law enforcement. There's always law enforcement present as strong secondary or ancillary characters, simply because that's the way the world works. Private citizens do not solve crimes for the most part. But we'd never gone the route of the traditional detective. And while I wouldn't describe Clay as a traditional detective, it does allow us to crack into some of that hard-boiled vein that I think that my dad and I both love so much. We both really love the old school hard-boiled writing of guys like Ross MacDonald or Jim Thompson. And so that was one reason to sort of pivot him away as a character. Another reason is because Clay is a family man, and he's got an expanding family, and he as he develops as a human being, this is sort of the path that makes sense for him as a family man, as a father. And that is something that I personally can identify with very deeply. I am a family man. I have 5 children who are, I'm not going to describe them as the center of my life, but they're five points of very strong gravity in my life. Et cetera, et cetera. So we felt like we could move him into a whole variety of exciting adventures, and that's what we've done over the last few books. In Coyote Hills, he takes on a case that is brought to him by a colleague of his, a character named Regina Klein, who's become a fixture of the series now. She's like a larger-than-life private detective who Clay collaborates with. She brings him to a family whose son has washed up dead in a public park under mysterious circumstances. Coyote Hills Regional Park, which is a real place south of where I live in the East Bay. All the books are set around this geographical area, and that was a very deliberate decision. For one thing, I live here in Northern California. My dad's down in Southern California, and although you do have some series set in San Francisco, there are some sort of classic series set in San Francisco. In terms of crime fiction, the East Bay is a sort of underexposed geography, and it's really interesting. It's interesting from a law enforcement perspective, from a political perspective, from a sort of like socioeconomic perspective. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is very, very extreme here. All these things that make for a great crime novel, but no one had consistently set a series here. So we chose to do that, and we try in each book to move the spotlight slowly around the different geographies. So this particular book starts along the water, and it focuses on the water. This is a book about the bay itself, the San Francisco Bay, and how that affects the lives of people who live here. And one thing I'll say, and then I'll stop talking, I mentioned this in the book, for people who live in the Bay Area, we have this great, huge body of water that we're all on top of. But by and large, we don't think about that. It's an annoyance. It's a thing that gets in the way when we're trying to get to places. It is not a seagoing culture in the way that, say, Southern California is, not nearly to the same extent. I'm sure all the kayakers in the Bay Area are going to get mad at me for saying this, but it's not a beach culture in the way you have in Southern California. The water's too cold. The coastline is very rough and rocky. And so, I realized as I was starting to do the research for this book that, like, I live a couple miles from this immense, enormously important from a commercial perspective and a historical perspective body of water. And I very rarely think about that. And so I wanted to spend this book thinking about that and thinking about how that affects the investigation of crime.
And it's fascinating. So much to unpack in what you just said. And I want to touch a little bit on all of those things. But in this particular book, one of the many things that I thought is such a standout about it is that it is part of a series, but it is easily accessible as a standalone or as the way into the series. If someone hasn't read any of these books, and they can definitely start with Coyote Hills, and then I'll know they'll want to go back to the beginning. How do you both, when you're writing this, balance the need to give your readers, to give your faithful readers, your fans, a feeling of familiarity, but on the other hand, to allow a new reader to feel just as familiar and just as comfortable in the book?
Hank, it's so tricky, and I'm sure you and other writers can appreciate how tricky it is to strike that balance between being sort of open and welcoming, but also providing a sense of familiarity and comfort and continuity between books. One difference between this series and, say, my dad's Delaware series is Delaware never ages. He's sort of frozen in time, and that was a deliberate decision on my dad's part. And I think a lot of writers have made a similar decision in that their characters either don't age or age very, very slowly. Like another example would be the Reacher series, which I'm a big fan of, right? So Jack Reacher, there are some subtle markers of time in that series if you read the whole thing, but for the most part, he's just this guy who sort of like never gets any weaker, never gets any frailer. He comes into town, kicks some ass and then leaves. With Clay, we wanted to do something a little different in that he does progress through stages of life. When we meet him in the first book, he's single. By the time we get to this book, he has two children, and all of those milestones in between are documented. And that's a very important part of the series for me, is following him and following his family. I think because of what I said before, family is such a critical part of my life, and I think it's so important in developing a character to bring the full character to bear. I will say, just parenthetically, that creates a whole set of complications that are not present with somebody like Reacher or Delaware, who are not really answerable to people, right? Who are not married, who don't have children, who can sort of do whatever they want at whatever risk to themselves, and there's no part of their brain that has to be like, wait a minute.
When a detective has children, somebody has to feed those people from time to time. Somebody has to go home from time to time.
Right. And somebody has to worry about what's going to happen if something violent were to happen on the job. And so, but the reality is, law enforcement have families. That is an actual conflict and stress that they deal with all the time. One of my close friends in Berkeley, who's been a very helpful resource for these books, is a Berkeley police lieutenant with 2 children. And I've talked to him and his wife about this at length, about the sort of mental splitting necessary to be able to do your job effectively and clearly without putting yourself in excessive harm's way.
Because the decisions that you make as a law enforcement officer that you would make if you were single might be a lot riskier than that you might make
completely
as a family. Also, you're making your family vulnerable.
100%. So what we chose to do in making that a part of Clay's character was to incorporate some of that stress and those conversations into the books themselves. So there's not a lot. There's still crime novels, but there are a number of passages where Clay and his wife have to negotiate what his boundaries are for safety. There's one book in particular, Half Moon Bay, where they talk about that at length, because it is a crime that starts to affect him and his family personally. So part of his journey as a character has been that maturation and that growth. But
go ahead.
No, just gonna say, but all of this, we hope, does not come at the expense of making it impossible to come in at any point. Every novel starts with, some sort of situating scene that sort of lets you know where he is, what he is doing, and allows the story to start now, going forward.
We'll go back to that, because that's a really important point, and one of the things I adore about this book. But let me ask you another thing about Clay first, and then let's go on to the particular the structure of this book, because everything you say is so fabulous, and my brain is going a mile a minute. Because in a series, though, you have this main character, Clay.
Yeah.
And like Reacher or like Kinsey Malone.
Yeah.
Who the reader knows is not going to die. So the mortality of that main character cannot be the stakes of the book, because whatever happens, he's going to be back in book 7. What techniques do you both use to make the story still be compelling when you know that Clay Edison is not going to die? You know what I mean? The problem is that there's got to be something else you care about so deeply.
It's such a great question, and it's such a great point, right? There's this, right, that or at least, well, I will say something. This is the last book on the contract, so who knows what's going to happen in book 7. And I will say that, like, some authors have made the surprise killing of characters a stock and trade of how they create suspense. You had that a lot with George R. R. Martin and the Game of Thrones. His whole thing was, you like this person? Guess what? I'm going to cut their head off. But we're not doing that. I would say, so here's how I think of crime novels in general. That you operate on a spectrum from the pure thriller, which is really motivated by present tense danger and physical action, and the pure cozy procedural, which is really an intellectual puzzle. And can we solve this, right? And there's every shade in between. So again, to cite something like Reacher, Reacher has some books that are more physical, where there's really a lot of fighting and action going on. There's some that are more investigative. I think with the Clay books, they tend to lean more investigative as opposed to physically dangerous. There are a few that where the physical peril really comes to the fore. And I would say that while while I don't think anybody's expecting Clay to die. First of all, I do want people to believe that people around him could die or get hurt, and they do sometimes. Like that happens. And I think it's part of the suspension of disbelief that, like, when you're pushing somebody to an extreme point, at least at the level of the sentence, you have to expect that maybe in the next sentence a bullet's going to rip through his heart, right? So it's you create that tension and then release. But it's really hard. You hit on something really, really difficult that I still struggle with after 14 books of how to balance that.
But I think one of the reasons you succeed so well at this is that you allow the readers, or create a way for the reader to really care about the secondary characters.
Yes.
They're not just along for the ride, but we're invested in them, and some of them we really love, and those people could die.
Yes, for sure. And I think both my dad and I are big believers that, like, there are no small characters. Everybody matters. We really try to invest everybody, small to big, good to bad, with a sense of humanity and a story and a backstory. I do a lot of backstory creation that doesn't make it onto the page, because it's so important for me to understand who I'm writing, and to write characters rather than caricatures.
Yes, and I see that. So we're talking about, if you just joined us, lucky you, we're talking about Coyote Hills by Jonathan and Jesse Kellerman. We're talking a little bit about character development, and I'm going to go on to something else. But the characters in this book, the characters who are in the cast of this book, the parents of the victim are so gorgeously drawn. Regina is so gorgeously drawn. The circle of friends that the victim had are so gorgeously drawn. You would know them and you can see them. And yet the book is very, and I say this with the highest of confidence, very sparely written. It's tight. How hard do you?
Sorry, what was I missed the end of that? How
hard do you work on that, on making it just move along?
The spareness. That is, I think that's the difference between the initial draft and later drafts. I tend to overwrite and then go back with an axe. And after some time, obviously you need to give that text time to kind of sit and marinate. And then when I come back to it, I'm really looking at the level of the word, the sentence, the scene, the paragraph, the scene, the chapter. Do we need this? Can this be done with one fewer word? It really starts at that level. Can we take out one word from this sentence and make it better? So that is where 90% of the effort goes, is in paring back. And it's, again, a deliberate decision to try and go after the holy grail of this hard-boiled standard that was established in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Those great spare novels.
It's just such a page turner. And one of the things that is so brilliant about it, one of the many things, is how it just starts. You're just in this story from absolutely moment one, page one. You know what the goal is, you know what the quest is, and you're on the train with this. Is that something that you think about, just getting the book right underway?
Totally. And I will tell you that I can remember writing the first scene of this book very, very clearly. You sometimes you start books in different places. Some books start with an idea, some books start with an image or a phrase, and this book really started with its opening line. So one thing that was really really important about this book that I wanted to establish right away is that the character of Regina Klein, who we introduced in the previous book, The Lost Coast, was not only back, but was going to be a big, important part of this book. That, we had such a terrific response to her as a character. She's so good. I don't know where she came from, by the way. She was just, when we were writing The Lost Coast, she just sort of like sprang from my forehead, fully formed. And so we really wanted to get her back from second one on the clock in this book. And so I knew that this book was going to be a case that Regina brings to Clay, and I knew she was going to bring it to him in her characteristic, abrupt way. And so it sort of that first line in that first scene wrote itself so quickly, even before I knew what the case was.
And you see how even the page looked. And
Right. Right.
the book starts,
It's,
Regina Klein called. And
yeah.
and when you think about how, and I want you to understand, you all, how genius that is, because that is a domino that falls that starts the entire book. And it also is something that Clay responds to.
Right.
And then she says, "Take me to lunch."
Yeah. It's not a request, it's a command. And that just tells you so much about their relationship, which I think really it just sets the, and that whole first, you don't need to hold up the page again, but that first page is she's giving him orders and he's asking her questions like, how have you been? Like what's going on? And it just,
And what that does is I mean, and it's a masterclass in writing, because it sets up the characters and the relationships, and the reader is instantly drawn into that, because the banter and the dialogue are so fabulous, and each character is in their own character, and we know them without even seeing them or knowing what they're talking about. They're talking about two different things, and they're talking about the same thing. Talk about the dialogue is incredible. The dialogue is crisp and fast and sort of 1940s movie sounding, but very contemporary. I don't want to, this is a very extremely contemporary book, but that speed and the back and forth, the thrust and parry. Can you talk a little bit about what that's like to write, and is that fun?
Absolutely. So an important thing to know about me is you alluded to this when you were giving my bios. My background is in theater. I wrote plays almost exclusively for like a decade, between the ages of like 15 and 25. That is what I did. My graduate degree is in playwriting, not in fiction. And so dialogue has always been the easiest and most fun part of writing prose for me. It's just, and I'll tell you something funny in a second about it. But I love that feeling of as you say, the rhythmic back and forth between two people. I love the music of human speech, and so it's just something that I've always been able to do. I'm a mimic. Even as a little kid, I would imitate people's voices and imitate sounds, and I see my kids doing it. And I don't know, maybe everybody does this, maybe, or maybe it's just me, and or maybe it was just encouraged in our family. But that's sort of like the sort of weapon number one for me, is creating images and character through speech. I'll tell you something very funny, which is I write with earplugs in, and I only started doing this like 4 or 5 years ago, when we had to have our roof replaced. And it was, I don't know if you've ever had your roof replaced, but it's incredibly noisy. And I'm on the second floor, this office on the second floor, and they are jumping on the roof, and like the light fixture came down and crashed behind me, and stuff is falling off the shelves. And it was just, but I had to work. So I got my earplugs, and I stuck in my earplugs, and I started writing like that. And completely to my astonishment, I realized I was talking to myself as I was writing.
Oh.
I discovered this at the age of 42 or whatever. I've been writing since I was 5. For 35 plus years, I had no idea that I was doing this. I talk to myself constantly as I write. I say what I'm writing out loud, especially the dialogue. I am doing both voices, physically articulating just really, really low, which is a thing that schizophrenic people do. They talk in a sub-vocalization. And so, but I was unaware of it until I started writing with earplugs in. So I don't know, maybe that's part of it.
Sometimes I write by dictating with the voice software, and that's fun to do too, because the dialogue does come out to be very genuine. I have 2 more questions for you. We have a million more questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. But very quickly, I realized I never asked you, what is the plot of this book?
What is the plot of this book? Okay, so in one sentence, without any spoilers, I think I told you that Clay is hired by a couple whose son has washed up on the shore of a regional park. In essence, it starts when he's called in to meet with them, and they are unconvinced. The coroner has ruled that his death is an accident. I amend that. They rule it, the cause of death is the manner of death is undetermined. They don't know exactly what happened to him, and the parents are adamant that this could not be the case, and that something nefarious has happened to him. But they're having trouble advocating with law enforcement. So they hire Clay to sort of investigate independently and advocate for them, which is a not uncommon thing with families who have the means to do that when they find themselves confronted by a frustrating situation. Clay is he's wary because he, as a former law enforcement officer himself, he has a sense that the people involved are usually doing a good job or usually doing the best that they can with the information that they have. So he agrees to investigate conditionally with the idea that if he finds nothing, he finds nothing, and that's, he's not going to make something up to please them, which is a thing, unfortunately, that some unscrupulous private investigators will do. They'll string clients along for the sake of maintaining a paycheck. And let's put it this way. Things snowball from there, and the case gets considerably more complicated than he could have possibly anticipated.
And if you like Robert B. Parker or all of those really smart, fast-paced, spare, terrific storytellers, absolute page turner, that's what Coyote Hills is. You will absolutely love this, you all. Let me ask you one more question, and that is, of course, I have to ask you about writing with your dad. You alluded
Sure.
to that earlier. Sure. What was the moment that started, and who said what, and who agreed, and what do you think about that?
So before the Clay series, we wrote two books with a different character, The Golem of Hollywood and The Golem of Paris, which were originally intended to be a longer series for a variety of reasons, didn't pan out that way. And the origin of that collaboration, that was the first time we'd worked together. And the origin of that collaboration was I had just finished my 5th standalone novel, Potboiler. I had just been nominated for the Edgar. And I was sort of between projects. We were visiting my parents in LA for Thanksgiving, in fact. So it was almost exactly 13 or 14 years ago. It must have been 14 years ago. And my mom had just come back from a trip to Prague. And, my dad has written primarily one character series, the Delaware series, for 40 plus years, with occasional excursions to write standalone novels. He's got Petra as a character. He's got Daniel Sharavi as a character, but mostly the Delaware series. So the trip to Prague was very inspiring for him, and he wrote 50 or 60 pages of a very, I guess, uncharacteristically surreal novel with a crime element, but set against a sort of a mystical backdrop in Prague. Prague, if you may or may not be aware, for some of you may know, is sort of in sort of mythical Jewish lore is this place where strange things happen, notably the creation of the golem, which is this sort of like mud monster that has taken on sort of broader cultural connotations over the years. It's really a Jewish story at root. So he started noodling around to writing 50, 60 pages, and he gave it to me to look at when I was in LA visiting, almost in a kind of sheepish way, like, look at this thing. And it was just wild. And I was like, you got to write this. This is so good. It's so interesting. And he said, no, I'm busy. And then we sort of like, we're going back and forth. And he's like, why don't you take a crack at it? So that was how it started. But there was no plan. There was no plan for how we were going to collaborate. There was no plan for what we were going to do with it when we finished. And there was certainly no expectation that this would become 13 years of collaboration. But we had so much fun doing it, and there was interest. So we kept on going. And that's sort of like been my career for the last 12, 13 years has been collaborating with him, because these books, people want to read them, and they're so time consuming.
Happy Thanksgiving. So talking about collaboration, how do you do that?
Like, what's the mechanics of how we collaborate? So generally, it's not fruitful, in my opinion, to exchange short chunks, because you can't develop a rhythm that way. Books, and again, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. A novel is like 350, 400 pages, right? Somewhere between 300 and 400 pages, but you don't write 300 pages in a single sitting. A novel, what it really is 100 3-page sections or 104-page sections. the trick is to make it sound like one continuous, seamless product, and not to see all of the stitching that goes between those three pages. So that is a tall order and always a challenge that writers face when they're writing long form fiction. It would be exacerbated if we were to pass the book back frequently, because it would constantly be upshifting and downshifting. It would be way too difficult. So we write in big chunks, send it to each other, edit, and send back. And there's just this back and forth that eventually has us arrive at this sort of unified third voice, which is not quite him, not quite me. It's its own thing.
Well, it is supremely successful. The voice of this novel is absolutely terrific and compelling and relatable and really funny and touching and quite surprising. Lori says, that's not how my Thanksgiving, my family. That's true. That's true. Absolutely successful. Margaret in the back, let's take some questions from our audience. I have a million. I want you to look when you read this book, and I know you will. Lots of cool research in this book, so don't miss that part too. Andrew Ball says, Jesse, Hank and I are both theater fans. Do you miss playwriting, or perhaps do you have a play in the works? Also a fan of Berkeley Rep when I'm up there.
Oh, go Berkeley Rep. We love Berkeley Rep. Do I miss playwriting? 100%, absolutely. I would say that there's different kinds of ideas. And sometimes you don't know what kind of idea the idea is until it's sat there for it. There are novel ideas, there are play ideas, there are story ideas. These days, when I have what I would call a play idea, I see, is this something I can reformat to make into a novel idea, or is it really going to live on its own as a play? Or more frequently these days, is this something that I would be able to develop for another visual medium? Because let me be very clear. Theater is primarily a visual medium. I strongly believe that. Different from, say, a radio play, which is purely a verbal medium. A play is a blueprint. A play is not a finished product. A script is a blueprint. A script is not the finished product. The performance is the finished product. So insofar as that there are some overlaps between that and, say, a television show, I tend to push most of my theater-like ideas toward the television part of my brain, because that's just a more viable, feasible way for me to develop them in a way that makes sense economically. Plays are just, I love it so much, and it's just such an incredibly unforgiving medium. It takes so much from you and gives so little back. So do I miss it? 100%. Do I feel like I can scratch that itch well enough in other ways.
That's great. I mean, that's wise to think, I could make that into a TV show, and that would be pretty good. Who else has a question? Good question, Andrew. Thank you. Betty Fellow says, was the title set from the beginning, or did it change? Hi, Betty.
Well, a very good question. Let me think. So titles, we have had, some titles have come to the, sometimes the title has preceded the book itself, like The Lost Coast. That's just, a wonderfully evocative title, and by the way, a real place in California. A number of the books, not all of them, but a number of the books are named for real places set around Northern California. So Half Moon Bay is a real place, The Lost Coast is a real place, and Coyote Hills is a real place. I was looking at the map trying to figure out, where am I going to put this body? Where does it make sense to put this body? Really, I try. You don't want to be handcuffed by reality, but I do try to be respectful of reality and geography. And geography is so important in California. I was looking at the map, and I said, "What the heck is this place? I'd never even heard of it, Coyote Hills." And it's such a weird, spooky thing. And so the first thing I did was drive down there. It's in Fremont. It's maybe about 40 minutes from where I live, and I drove out there. And it's this crazy isolated place. There's a path that runs out to the bay past these giant old salt collection ponds. The whole area around the South Bay used to be salt drying ponds, and some of them are there's like maybe one or two that are still active, but mostly they've been converted to park. But you can still see sort of the turf boundaries of these old ponds, and they're very beautiful and weird and haunting and mysterious. And I strapped on my rollerblades, and I rollerbladed out to the end of the path, like 6 miles, with a video. I have a video, like a first-person video, rollerblading through this park all the way out to the ocean. So that is where the title came from.
That's amazing, and you can feel how good a title that is. It's multi-layered, even if you don't even know what the book is about. It feels like is about something else. We have one more. Let's take one more question, and then we'll pick a winner. And who has another question? Will this be on audio? Hey, Katie, will this be on audio? And if so, did you pick the narrators?
So all our books are on audio as far as I know. I don't remember, like they usually contact us at some point to say, hey, we're recording the audio. Here's the narrator. But I've gotten I get so many emails that like I can't keep track of these things. I want to say I'm 99% sure. Yes, it will be on audio. I don't know who the narrator is. I haven't picked a narrator myself in a long time. We've worked with a whole variety of people over the years. My dad worked with John. What's his name escaping me? Great narrator, was the Delaware narrator for a long time. I worked with Scott Brick for a number of years, who is terrific, and a guy named Kirby. These names are escaping, but I don't think I've had a selection sent to me, pick a voice in probably like 5 or 10 years. So, but Katie, it really affects your experience of hearing the book. I had a story, like a one-off story that was purchased by Amazon, and I wrote this story which I was really, really proud of, and then I started looking, it got like all these 1-star reviews, and I was like, what is going on here? And then I realized that they were all or many of them anyway were responding to the audio version, and apparently the audio version was, the person who read it was like really histrionic and difficult to listen to. And so so that sort of was a powerful lesson in how deeply it affects the listening experience.
Yes, absolutely. So it can really make a difference. I picked the narrators, the actors of my audiobooks, and it's a different book from every voice. There's just no question about it. Sue Street, I want to give a shout out to Sue Street, who says she's driving back from a doctor's appointment, so just listening, can't miss A Mighty Blaze on Crime Time. That's so fabulous, Sue. I hope everything is just fine. Margaret, let's take one more question and then pick the winner. Is it going to work? The winner is Sue Street.
Oh, wow.
Hey, I didn't know that. And that's so funny. Imagine that. Sue is in the car. She wins the prize that lets you know, never, never, never miss a Crime Time on A Mighty Blaze, even if you're in a car, but drive carefully.
Yeah, hands on the wheel, Sue. Don't get too excited.
She's applauding. She's cheering.
I'm not responsible.
If you are not Sue Street, you know what to do. Run, click, click, click. Get your copy of Coyote Hills. I promise you will be hooked on the series. It is quite amazing. Before I let you go, let me say that next week we will be back. No, it's not next week. It is the 11th. Let me check my date here. It is November the 11th. Okay, November 4th. I'm on book tour. We will not be here. November the 11th, we will talk to Megan Church, whose brand new book, The Mad Wife, was an instant New York Times bestseller. It is getting so much buzz, and I cannot wait to read this. So I hope you will join us on November 11th for Megan Church. That's going to be great. Today, we talked to Jesse Kellerman, one half of the Jonathan and Jesse Kellerman fabulously successful duo, and their new book, Coyote Hills. Jesse, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Hank. I am so grateful for the opportunity.
It's been
thanks to everyone who tuned in, but also.
Oh, I agree. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. And remember, we'll see you next time. Not next week, but the next week. And until then, remember, it is always safe inside a book.